took 3 years to acquire all the property for Sugarland. And I asked Mr. Armstrong about it, and he said it was so convoluted that the minutes didn't even specify all the details. So no one really knows how it all went. 1909, they bought some. Or by 1909, they bought everything. They had incorporated Imperial, and they now owned about 18,500 acres, 2 raw sugar mills, the refinery, cotton gins, a saloon, barracks for the convict laborers, rail lines, and a whole lot more. Everything had been in foreclosure. Everything was in terrible shape. The refinery was not set up for year-round production, and so they've got a mess on their hands, and they have to start turning a profit. The first thing they need is a workforce. So convicts are here. And the state of Texas did a convict lease system after the Civil War. They took the convicts and they let planters lease them back. It was pretty despicable. It was an awful system, but they were here. Both Eldridge and Kempner had already employed convict labor. So Mr. Kempner just said, what we need is we need to make better conditions for these workers. We need them. We need to make better conditions. So they invested in a $30,000 modern concrete barracks out toward where Central is. Had 416 prisoners and guards in it, and it was the best facility in the state of Texas at that point. As you might expect, Eldridge manipulated the convict lease system a little bit. He got them to change the conditions of the contract so that they only were shipping their cane on the Sugarland Railroad, which he happened to own. But at that time, they were also using the refinery almost exclusively. When the state abolished convict lease in 1912, Eldridge sued. Well, that didn't work very well. So then he came up with a really good idea that the central prison of all of Texas should be right here in Sugarland, and that he should be paid a $50,000 a year salary. Remember, he was getting 5. Okay. Well, that didn't work, and he managed to get at such odds with the state that the Imperial Refinery, the state refused to use them. They refused to use the refinery at all. Luther Broad. The prisoners picked cotton during the big storm in 1915. The prisons didn't buy Imperial sugar, though. Gus Ulrich was an Austrian immigrant from Schulenburg. He was 26 when Eldridge hired him to manage the convicts at the Imperial Farm in 1906. 1908, he moved over to the refinery. He became assistant manager over all of the holdings, and he was answerable only to Eldridge and Kempner. To build the homes and the other buildings, Ulrich brought in craftsmen, primarily from the Schulenburg area, people he knew. They brought in other people. He shared all of his personal knowledge with Eldridge. Robert Armstrong. Gus Ulrich was Eldridge's right-hand man, his first hire. Ulrich brought in builders of the plant, town to run the store. Louisiana sugar people came for the mill so the refinery could run 12 months. There were half French names and half Czech names. We called them Teutonic Cajuns. Robert Schumann's dad came to Sugarland in 1915 from Schulenburg. He worked in the grocery department of the company store. He followed my uncle. My Uncle Paul was the first, and like many people who worked for the industries, they were from Schulenburg, Hallettsville, Weimar. Some of those fellows would come in and were so good, hardworking, desirable people, Imperial said, "Don't you have someone else over there?" They just came in, and they came in, and they came in. But the sugar company had them from Louisiana. So that's what made up the hub of Sugarland. Buddy Blair. But they originally came to Sugarland at the dam. Used to be on Blair Road. I don't know if they called the dam after the Blairs or after the dam Blairs. It was the Blair Dam. My grandfather ran the lumber yard for the Sugarland Industries. My father was a carpenter for Sugarland Industries, and he built a number of these houses through here. Yes, and my aunt and uncle. B.W. Hughes was a timekeeper for the company. He died when I was 10 or 11. Nola, his wife, lived next door in the house next door. And then I had another uncle And he was a sugar boiler. Emmy McBride. They lived down on Brook Street. Robert Armstrong. Gus Ulrich brought most of the employees here. If an employee was no good, he wasn't here. So everybody was a damn good worker by Gus's standards, which were high. He knew everything about the townspeople. He had a nest of spies. He was a nice guy, but if it was a choice between compassion or good business sense would win every time. As the town began to form, workers moved into the Imperial Inn. T.C. Roselle. Now, the Imperial Inn came off the Thatcher plantation. That was the Thatcher home, which sat down there at the bottom of what was called the Grand Central area. It's now the Highlands area. It's now in First Colony. Now, I got this information from Willie Reese, who was born and raised here. He was born in 1890. Willie knew the Thatcher home. He was raised out there, and he told me this. By 1914, the town began building homes for workers. Exterior elevations and floor plans in Sugar Land varied, which was very unusual in a company town. There were a couple waves of construction over 2 decades. Construction began on the hill. The hill was the town's highest elevation, approximately 90 feet above sea level, to the east side of the refinery. The initial dwellings that were built contained a kitchen, living room, a bathroom, and 1 or 2 bedrooms. Sugar Land was a totally segregated company town. The hill, the flats, and Rat Row were whites-only sections of town. The flats sat due south across the rail tracks in an area prone to seasonal flooding. Both the hills and the flats had graveled concrete curb streets with drainage ditches and concrete sidewalks. And eventually the Sugar Land School complex that we're in right now was on the hill. That's where you are right now. The Teacherage and Imperial Inn were in the flats. In that third neighborhood, Rat Row, spread across the front of the refinery. T.C. Roselle. That was the nickname we gave it. That was Imperial Boulevard. There were homes down there. There was a white section. Company homes of the Imperial Sugar Company. Rent houses. A nice residential area. Called it Rat Row because they had a cotton gin and a feed mill close in that area. You'll find rats in feed mills and cotton gins. The homes on the hill, the flats, and Rat Row had metered water lines, indoor faucets, a bathroom connected to sanitary sewer, electricity, gas and telephone lines. Eldridge had a telephone line put in 1908 between his house and the refinery. So if you paid a little extra rent, you could have a telephone line in your house. I'd like to give you an aside about telephone service, and this is from Buddy Blair, who just happens to be here this evening. Nola Hughes was a telephone operator. Her nephew, Buddy Blair. They used to, people in town would call the operator and say, "I'm going over next door for a few minutes. Can I put the telephone in the bed? And if she cries, call me next door." They babysat a lot of kids that way. T.C. Roselle was born in 1915. His dad worked for the prison system just outside of town. We lived out there until about 1922. Then we moved into town. We got a house, and it had running water, had a bathtub, all sorts of things. Very nice. We didn't have it out there. T.C. Roselle used to ride his bike around town, and I knew who lived in every house. Buddy Blair. It was great growing up in a small town where you knew everybody and everybody knew you. The only bad part about that, if you got into trouble before you got home, your parents already knew before you got there. Robert Armstrong. Housing was standard for the times, not above the working man. It's because of the crew under Otis Enquist. They did repairs and upkeep. T.C. Roselle. All you had to do was call. They had a department at Imperial Sugar, a department. That's what we did. They had carpenters, painters, plumbers, electricians, the whole shebang. They took care of the company houses. If a screen got punched out, call them up. They'd come put a new screen in. A door, a light fixture. One rule for company housing. If you stayed in the same place and you didn't add on, your rent didn't go up. Buddy Blair. When we bought this house, This house rented for $23 a month. 1958, I guess it was. The way they determined the rent was when somebody moved out of it, the company would come in and do some work, and then they'd raise the rent. The rent was never raised unless they came and did work on it. And they just didn't raise it. These houses were here for the employees. In the late 1950s, Sugar Land was in the extraterritorial jurisdiction for Houston. The only way to protect the autonomy of the town was for Imperial and Sugar Land Industries to turn the control over to their residents. The company town died quietly after incorporation. T.C. Roselle and other residents helped gather signatures for Sugar Land to incorporate. T.C. Roselle. Talk about changes. For a company town to an incorporated city, those of us who were born and raised in a company town, and many of them were, we had lived here all these years and had everything done for us. Never had to pay any taxes, no insurance. In the old days before incorporation, Imperial Sugar Company furnished a garbage pickup 6 days a week. They picked your garbage up every day, Monday through Saturday. Sunday was the only day we didn't get garbage put out. So incorporated, we get this notice that there'll be garbage pickup on the curb. That you've got to put it on the curb in only 2 days a week. I said, and everyone else said, my gosh, they'll have this town stinking. Just 2 days a week? That's unheard of. Robert Armstrong returned to Sugar Land after college and raised his own children here. This was just a darn good place to live. There was security here, and you knew all the people. You confidently expected you'd marry the local high school girl and get a job at the sugar company, just like your daddy did. Good jobs, well taken care of. I asked why anyone returned to Sugar Land after seeing the big wide world in military service. T.C. Roselle, because this place, it was home. It never crossed our mind to move. Buddy Blair. Somebody would say, you ought to move. No way. The only way I'm moving is when they carry me out. The company town didn't own your soul. You carried it in your heart. T.C. Roselle had a great quote, and this is what I'll end with tonight. I'm Sugar Land born and I'm Sugar Land bred, and when I die, I'll be Sugar Land dead.